She'd been missing for 21 years when federal agents found her sitting alone at a folding table, sketching a sunrise like it was just another ordinary morning. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She just lifted her eyes, nodded once, and said 3 words, "It's time." No tears. No shock. No confusion. As if she had been waiting for this exact moment all along. Now, before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from Georgia, where this all happened? Maybe Texas? California? Somewhere overseas? I see you. Let me know, because this story is about to pull you in, and I want to know who's riding with me. And listen, if you're new here, I'm on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you deep dives like this one. Stories the mainstream forgot. Cases that deserve answers. If you believe Lila Monroe's story deserves to be told, if you're already hooked and want to see where this goes, then hit that subscribe button right now. That one click. It tells the algorithm that this story matters. That she matters. Don't scroll past and forget. Take a side. Her side. All right, let's get into it. Before we go deeper, a quick content warning. This story includes details involving a missing child, long-term confinement, and emotional trauma. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. But here's the question that kept investigators up at night for 2 decades. How does a missing teenager face federal agents with that level of calm? To understand, we need to go back to the morning her entire life split in 2. June 2nd, 2003. It felt like any other summer morning in Rome, Georgia. Warm air hung low over the Appalachian foothills. The roads near Highway 27 were quiet, just early commuters and yellow school buses making their rounds. In a small house at the end of a gravel road, 14-year-old Lila Monroe stepped outside with her sketchbook tucked under one arm. Her mother had already left for work. Her father was somewhere on a long-haul trucking route through Tennessee. Lila walked toward the bus stop with her headphones in and her jacket sleeves pushed up past her elbows. A neighbor watched her pass, moving slowly, sketching something on a folded piece of paper as she walked. That was the last confirmed sighting of Lila Monroe. By 10 a.m., the school office called her mother. Something felt wrong. Lila was quiet, yes, but she was predictable. She never skipped class. She never wandered. She never broke pattern. Within an hour, deputies searched the woods behind the small Baptist church near her home. K9 units followed a faint trace near a drainage ditch, but heavy rain the night before had washed everything clean. By late afternoon, the search stretched across Rome, Cedar Bluff, and Somerville. No footprints. No clothing. No personal items. Nothing that revealed where she went or who she was with. The only thing ever recovered? Her sketchbook. It was pulled from a runoff pipe 3 days later. Most of the pages were destroyed by water. But one drawing survived, and it would haunt investigators for years. A shadow. Standing behind a girl. No face. No features. Just a shape looming in the background. For many in that small Georgia town, that single image settled deep into their minds, a question without an answer, repeated in whispers at church, at diners, at gas stations. Lila wasn't just missing. She was gone, without a single trace. In those early days, hope still breathed. Volunteers taped flyers to every surface in town, grocery store windows, the hardware shop, the Dairy Queen on Broad Street. The community gathered on the courthouse steps for candlelit vigils, wax dripping down their hands as they prayed for her return. But as weeks passed with no answers, the crowds grew smaller. Ribbons faded under the Georgia sun. Flyers curled at the edges and peeled off into gutters. Inside the Monroe home, grief pressed down like stone. Lila's mother, Diane, quit her job to chase leads across county lines. Her father, Carl, left the long-haul routes behind and took a warehouse job just to stay close. Their marriage, already strained, buckled under the weight of silence and blame. Some nights brought arguments. Others brought nothing at all. Just two people sitting in the same room, drowning in separate pain. By 2005, the case was officially marked inactive. No suspects. No witnesses. No useful leads. A file sat in the Floyd County Sheriff's Office, collecting dust. And a family sat in a hollow house with a hole nothing could fill. But here's what nobody knew at the time: Lila Monroe was still alive. And she wasn't nearly as far away as anyone believed. To understand how she stayed hidden for 21 years, and why she never reached out, we need to follow a trail that started quiet, stayed buried, and didn't resurface until someone opened the wrong storage unit 2 decades later. The first 12 hours shaped everything. When deputies arrived on June 2nd, they initially treated it as a possible runaway situation. But that theory collapsed fast. Lila had no history of leaving without warning. No trouble at school. No secret boyfriend. No friend she might have crashed with. Her bedroom looked untouched, exactly like every other morning. Her backpack sat on the bed where she always left it after homework. Her jacket was missing, but nothing else. Not even the sketchbook she never went anywhere without. By early afternoon, the sheriff's office issued a public call for volunteers. Rome was a small town. Word traveled fast. Within hours, people showed up in work boots, old caps, and faded jeans, all ready to push through brush, cross muddy fields, and search every forgotten corner near those woods. A line of trucks and cars stretched along the road behind the Baptist church. They weren't searching for a runaway anymore. They were searching for something much worse. The first sweep focused on the narrow trail behind the church, a shortcut local kids had used for years. But the ground was soft from the previous night's storm. Footprints overlapped in messy, unreadable patterns. Another team followed a shallow stream winding through thick trees toward the old supply store. The water ran too high to see anything useful along the banks. A third group checked the abandoned smokehouse at the edge of town, a spot where teenagers sometimes hid to smoke. The door hung open. The air inside smelled like dust and rot. But no one had been there in weeks. Just before sunset, a helicopter arrived. Its blades beat low over the fields behind the Monroe house, stirring dust clouds that drew neighbors into their yards. Some watched in silence. Others clasped their hands and prayed. The spotlight swept back and forth over the darkening trees like a slow, mechanical eye. Nothing moved below. Inside the Monroe house, Diane sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she never drank from. Her eyes kept drifting to the clock. She kept expecting the front door to swing open. Kept expecting Lila to walk in, confused, apologizing for being late. A deputy tried to comfort her. "Kids wander sometimes," he said. "They get turned around." But even he didn't sound convinced. He kept one hand on his radio, waiting for news that never came. Carl arrived late that night. He'd driven straight from a delivery run in Tennessee, white-knuckling the steering wheel the entire way. He walked through the door with one question: where was she last seen? Not what happened. Not who called. He needed something concrete. Something he could fix with his hands. But there were no easy answers. The search team stayed out past midnight. Flashlights bobbed through the trees like low floating stars. Dogs barked at shadows that led nowhere. One handler said a K-9 picked up a faint scent near the drainage ditch, but lost it when the soil shifted underfoot. They marked the area with yellow tape, just in case. At 2 a.m., deputies called off the night search. Volunteers trudged back to their cars in heavy silence. They had covered more than 10 miles of ground, barns, fields, creek beds, a construction site behind the high school. They found nothing. No jacket. No shoes. No tracks. No sign that Lila had walked more than 100 yards from the road. When the search resumed at sunrise, fewer people showed up. That's how it goes. The first wave comes with energy and hope. The second wave carries stiff backs, tired eyes, and quiet doubt. Deputies brought more dogs. Volunteers packed bug spray and bottled water. They pushed deeper into thicker woods, but the terrain grew harder, the trees denser, the ground more uneven. Around mid-morning, a deputy radioed in a possible find. Everyone froze. Someone whispered, "Please let it be her." But when investigators reached the location, it was just an old hunting jacket left by someone months earlier. Not Lila's. Not helpful. Just another dead end. By midday, the sheriff met privately with the Monroes. "We're treating this as a missing child case," he said. "We're not ruling anything out." His words were meant to reassure. But Diane understood what that phrase really meant. It meant fear had entered the room. It meant the clock was no longer their friend. Over the next week, more than 100 volunteers searched miles of terrain. Flyers appeared in every storefront window. Her name echoed through grocery aisles, gas stations, and church hallways. Tips poured in from as far as Chattanooga. Deputies followed everyone. Not a single lead connected to anything real. And by the end of that week, a quiet truth settled over Rome, and Lila hadn't wandered off. Someone, or something, had pulled her off the path she walked every single day. And whatever happened, left no trace behind. Before Lila Monroe became a headline and a case number, she was a girl whose whole world revolved around pencil lines and quiet corners. People in Rome didn't talk about her much before she vanished, not because they didn't care, but because she didn't demand attention. She lived on the edges of everyday life, somewhere between the laughter and the silence, where her drawings mattered more to her than almost anything else. Her mother, Diane, once said Lila drew like she was trying to understand the world one line at a time. Stacks of sketchbooks filled the space under her bed, pine trees, old barns, stray cats, strangers she'd only glimpsed once. Some pages had notes in the margins. A single word. A question. Sometimes just a date. She was preserving moments she didn't want to lose. Her father, Carl, respected her talent, but never fully understood it. He came from a house where feelings stayed behind closed doors, and hard work mattered more than anything else. He loved his daughter. He just didn't always know how to show it. Their conversations often ended with both of them standing in the same room, yet feeling miles apart. At school, Lila kept mostly to herself. Teachers called her quiet but gifted. Her math teacher joked that she could solve equations faster than anyone, but only spoke when you called her name twice. Her art teacher said she worked with a level of focus rarely seen in teenagers. She'd skip lunch sometimes, completely lost in a sketch. Her best friend, Harper, remembered her as the one person who could turn a blank page into something alive. They used to sit on the back steps behind the gym during lunch. Harper would ramble about boys, weekend plans, the usual teenage noise. Lila would listen and sketch, offering soft opinions now and then. Once, Harper told her, "You're the calmest person I know." Lila just gave a faint smile, one that never quite reached her eyes. There were things Lila didn't talk about. Teachers noticed she stiffened when someone raised their voice. She flinched at sudden noises. Some mornings, she arrived with dark circles under her eyes. When anyone asked, she brushed it off. Just tired. Harper knew more than most, but not enough to see the full picture. She knew Lila's father had high expectations. She knew there were arguments at home, over chores, grades, small things that shouldn't have mattered. But she didn't know how deep the tension ran. She didn't know how heavy that house felt to the girl who walked through its halls every day. On weekends, Lila spent hours outside. She'd sit on the porch steps, bare feet on warm wood, listening to cicadas as evening settled in. She preferred being outside because the house always felt tight, like the walls were pressing in just a little. When she walked into the woods behind the church, her breath would ease. Those woods were the only place her thoughts didn't echo back at her. Her sketchbook pages told stories she never said out loud. One drawing showed a girl sitting at a window, knees pulled to her chest. Another showed a long hallway with a shadow at the far end. And one, the one found days after she vanished, showed a dark figure standing behind a girl. No face. No features. Just a shape. People debated that image for years. Some believed she'd drawn whoever took her. Others said it was just an expression of fear she couldn't put into words. Her mother believed it was neither simple nor symbolic. She believed Lila used that sketchbook to say things she didn't feel safe saying out loud. There was one more detail people remembered, something small, but it carried weight. The Sunday before she disappeared, Lila sat alone in the church youth room instead of joining the group. Headphones on. Sketching on scrap paper. When the youth pastor, Evan Cole, asked what she was working on, she covered the page with her hand. He said she seemed uneasy that day. Distant. Unwilling to meet his eyes. He didn't push. He thought it was just normal teenage moodiness. He never forgot that moment. Lila wasn't the kind of girl who simply vanished into thin air. She was thoughtful. Observant. She noticed things other people missed. So when she didn't show up at that bus stop, people didn't just feel confused. They felt a warning, the kind that starts quiet, but grows louder with every passing hour. Lila's life wasn't dramatic. It was tender. Complicated. Filled with things she never said out loud. And the more investigators learned about her, the clearer one truth became: she didn't leave this world without leaving traces. Those traces were buried in her sketches. In her silence. In the small moments people only understood years too late. All right, let me pause here for a second. We've just scratched the surface of who Lila was. A quiet girl. A gifted artist. Someone who noticed things most people missed and kept secrets even her closest friend couldn't see. So now I want to hear from you. Based on what you've learned so far, do you think someone close to Lila was involved in her disappearance? Or do you believe this was the work of a stranger, someone who watched, waited, and struck when no one was looking? Drop your theory in the comments right now. Let's build this case together. And if you haven't already, smash that like button. Every like tells the algorithm to push this story further. More eyes on this case means more people asking questions. More pressure. More accountability. If you're on Lila's side, if you believe her story deserves to be heard, then prove it. Like. Comment. Subscribe. Help me get to 1,000 subscribers so we can keep uncovering stories like this one. Now, let's get back into it. Because the town of Rome was about to change forever. From the outside, Rome, Georgia looked like a postcard in 2003. A place that moved at its own unhurried rhythm. Folks waved from porches. Church bells echoed down quiet streets. Kids rode bikes along gravel roads that hadn't changed in decades. But after Lila vanished, something shifted. It was subtle at first. Conversations grew softer. Doors locked earlier. Parents kept their children a little closer. Even the summer air seemed heavier, like the whole town was holding its breath. The stretch of woods behind the Baptist church had always been a shortcut. Teenagers used it to walk to school or cut through to the old store. It wasn't a dark or threatening place. You could pass through in 8 minutes if you didn't stop. But after the search teams left and the yellow tape came down, people started avoiding it. A few said they felt watched when they walked by. Others said it just felt wrong, in a way they couldn't explain. The Monroe house sat at the end of a gravel road lined with tall oaks. Neighbors described it as quiet even before the disappearance. After Lila vanished, the silence around it deepened. Friends brought casseroles. Pastors brought prayers. But nothing eased the feeling that the house had become a monument to grief. Diane kept the porch light on every night, just in case. Carl installed a motion sensor by the back door. He never admitted what he was afraid it might reveal. The community rallied the way small towns do. They tied ribbons around tree trunks, printed hundreds of flyers on office copiers and taped them across storefronts, Broad Street, East 2nd Avenue, Turner McCall Boulevard. Kids from school drew pictures of Lila and added them beneath the flyers. Some drawings were full of hope. Others had soft lines and sad colors that made adults stop and look away. But as weeks passed, the town's early unity began to crack. Rome wasn't big. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Some whispered about strangers spotted at gas stations. Others wondered if someone local had done something unthinkable. A few insisted Lila must have run away, though no one could explain why. Every theory said more about the person repeating it than about Lila herself. The sheriff's office held weekly updates at first. Parents filled the pews at the church hall to listen. They wanted facts. They wanted reassurance. But the updates always sounded the same: we're following every lead. We ask for your patience. We're not giving up. People nodded politely, then walked to their cars with heavier steps. Fear crept into daily routines. Families pulled kids from after-school programs. Parents stopped letting children walk home alone. Businesses near the search areas kept their lights on later. Men started keeping flashlights in their trucks, just in case. The old woods that once felt like a shortcut now felt like an open question, one nobody wanted to answer. Behind all that fear was something harder to admit: this didn't feel random. The search team sensed it. The deputies sensed it. The whole town sensed it. This wasn't a child taking a wrong turn. Something deliberate had happened. And it left no trail. Inside the Monroe home, grief spread like dust. Diane couldn't sleep in her bedroom anymore. The silence was too thick. She stayed on the couch, leaving the TV on low through the night so the quiet wouldn't swallow her whole. Carl threw himself into fixing things. He repainted the porch steps. Replaced a window that didn't need replacing. Tightened screws on cabinets that worked fine. He kept his hands busy because the alternative was letting his thoughts spiral. Neighbors noticed the distance between them. They rarely spoke when they were both home. Their house felt full of unspoken accusations, things neither of them could say out loud. Friends offered counseling numbers. The Monroes waved them off. In small towns, people don't always know what to do with pain that big. They just try to survive another day. Within a few months, Rome returned to its surface routines. Friday night football games, county fairs, crowded tables at the Dairy Queen. But whenever someone passed a streetlight pole with a faded flyer still stapled to it, they looked away. By winter, the flyer corners curled. The ink washed pale. The tape peeled off in strips. Every faded flyer was a reminder of the town's failure, not because they gave up, but because each passing week meant another 7 days without answers. People stopped saying her name as often. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Saying it forced them to confront a truth they didn't want to face. Lila Monroe had vanished from a place where children were supposed to be safe. And if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. The town never said it out loud. But the fear stayed. It lived in locked doors, in glances between parents, in the woods no one walked through anymore. Rome didn't lose its innocence all at once. It happened slowly, day by day, as the silence stretched forward with no sign of the girl who once sat on her porch, drawing a world she never fully felt part of. And deep down, people began to suspect something even harder to accept. Whoever did this knew the town, knew its roads, its rhythms, its blind spots. And they had crossed a line no one thought possible, without leaving a single trace. By the time the sun dipped behind the pine trees on June 2, 2003, the search for Lila Monroe had shifted from concern to dread. Deputies stopped using the word runaway. Volunteers stopped sounding hopeful. Parents gripped their children's hands a little tighter as they passed the church parking lot. A girl who didn't show up for school was now missing for more than 12 hours. And the whole town could feel the shift in the air. At 9:40 p.m., the sheriff ordered the first full nighttime sweep. Deputies gathered in the church lot beneath flickering streetlights. Volunteers lined up beside them in reflective vests, holding flashlights and bottled water. Someone passed around extra batteries. No one made small talk. The teams moved in careful rows through the woods behind the Monroe home. Every beam of light cut through tangled branches, skimmed over standing water, bounced off swaying leaves. The silence was so thick that every footstep cracked like breaking bone. If anyone had been hiding in those woods, they would have heard the searchers coming long before anyone saw them. A deputy radioed in a possible sighting near the drainage ditch. Everyone froze. Volunteers held their breath. Deputies jogged toward the location. But what they found wasn't a clue. It was a stray dog, startled by the lights, slipping off into the dark. Another false alarm. Another wave of disappointment. The sheriff redirected teams toward the field behind the high school. The grass had grown tall in the early summer heat. It brushed against knees as searchers waded through. Flashlights swept across the open space like slow-moving stars. Someone found a torn piece of fabric near the fence line. Hearts raced. But it was just an old sweatshirt, left behind by a student weeks earlier. Not Lila's. Not helpful. Just another dead end. Around midnight, the helicopter returned. Its blade stirred thick clouds of dust around the church parking lot. The spotlight swept in wide arcs, over the woods, the roads, the field behind the Monroe house. For a few seconds at a time, the ground below looked like daylight. Then it dropped back into shadow. Inside the kitchen, Diane stood by the window. Her hands trembled as she held a photograph of Lila, taken just 2 months earlier. In it, her daughter smiled faintly. But something in her eyes was hard to name. A quiet weight. A hidden thought. Diane ran her thumb across the image. Over and over again. She kept whispering the same two words, "Come home." As if somehow her daughter might hear. Carl paced the living room. He tried sitting. He tried standing still. He checked the front door, the back door, the windows, again and again, even though he knew it wouldn't change anything. His whole life had been about solving problems with his hands. But this problem had no shape. No handle. Nothing he could grip or fix. At 1:14 a.m., a volunteer near the edge of the woods called out. He'd heard something, a branch snapping, maybe a footstep. Searchers rushed toward the sound. Flashlights swept widely through the trees. Deputies shouted Lila's name into the dark. But the woods stayed silent. Whatever made that sound didn't make another. That night was defined by moments like that. Bursts of hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Every shadow felt important. Every sound felt like a sign. Every tree looked like it might be hiding something. The searchers pushed deeper into the forest, but the rain-swollen ground swallowed their efforts like a sponge. Around 2 a.m., the sheriff called a brief halt. Volunteers gathered in small clusters near the church. Clothes damp. Faces drawn. Hands shaking from exhaustion and fear. Someone passed around paper cups of coffee. One mother whispered, "I don't know how Diane is even standing." Nobody answered. The KA-19 regrouped for a second sweep of the drainage ditch. The dogs sniffed along the ground, pulling their handlers forward. One dog stopped suddenly, nose pressed flat to the soil. Everyone waited. Then it pulled away. Confused. The rain had shifted the ground too much. Whatever scent might have been there was gone. At 3:30 a.m., the sheriff made the call no one wanted to hear. "We stop for tonight. We resume at first light." Volunteers lowered their flashlights. Deputies radioed in the end of the sweep. Doors slammed. Engines turned over. The church lot emptied until only a few cruisers remained. Inside the Monroe home, Diane sat on the couch, hands pressed over her mouth. Carl stood by the window, watching the last patrol car disappear down the road. Neither of them spoke. Both of them knew what the silence meant. Daylight had offered nothing. Night had offered nothing. And the small window where answers usually appeared had already closed. Somewhere between her front porch and the bus stop, a 14-year-old girl had vanished without leaving a single clear sign. The woods gave nothing. The fields gave nothing. And the road between home and school now felt like the edge of a map, where everything past the border stays blank. But here's what the town didn't know that night: a clue did exist. Someone did see something. And that someone stayed quiet, for reasons that wouldn't come to light until years later. At sunrise on June 3rd, detectives stepped into the Monroe case with fresh eyes and a growing sense that something about this disappearance didn't fit the usual patterns. Children who wander off leave trails. A dropped shoe. A torn piece of clothing. Footprints pressed into soft ground. But overnight searches had produced nothing. Not one clear sign that Lila traveled past the end of her gravel road. That absence made detectives deeply uneasy. The first thing they did that morning was retrace her walk. They measured the distance from her front porch to the bus stop, 189 yards. A straight line. No sharp turns. No blind spots except a thick tree line on the left side of the road. The school bus driver confirmed she wasn't at the stop when he pulled up at 8:22 a.m. Her friend Harper, who usually rode the same route, never saw her that morning either. Detectives examined the gravel road inch by inch. They crouched low. Lifted stones. Checked for skid marks or disturbed soil. Nothing appeared out of place. A few tired tracks sat near the ditch, but those belonged to a neighbor who always parked there. No one saw a strange vehicle. No one heard an unfamiliar engine. Yet a 14-year-old girl vanished in broad daylight. Inside the Monroe home, the morning felt thick with exhaustion. Diane answered questions with a voice that kept breaking. Detectives asked about Lila's habits, her friends, her fears, her routines. When they asked whether she might have gone to meet someone secretly, Diane shook her head until tears fell. She wouldn't do that. She wasn't that kind of kid. Carl paced behind her. He didn't sit down once. Every few minutes, he asked, "What else do you need? What can I give you?" But what detectives needed most was the one thing he didn't have: a starting point. They checked Lila's room next. Her bed was made neatly. Her backpack sat by the wall with school supplies still inside. Nothing was missing except the jacket and the sketchbook. On her nightstand sat a small drawing of the church behind their house. A few smudges marked the bottom corner where her thumb had rubbed against the paper. Detectives asked about arguments, recent changes, anything unusual. Diane admitted there had been tension at home, but nothing that suggested Lila planned to leave. Carl stepped in, insisting she was responsible and reliable. The difference between their answers didn't go unnoticed. Detectives interviewed neighbors next. The man who last saw her walking said she looked calm, focused on a piece of paper. He assumed it was homework. Another neighbor mentioned noticing movement near the woods around the same time, but assumed it was a deer. A woman across the road said she heard a car door shut around 8:10 a.m., but couldn't say which direction the sound came from. Each detail felt small on its own. Together, they formed a puzzle with half the pieces missing. By noon, detectives widened the search radius. They checked drainage pipes, sheds, hunting blinds, and the old storm shelter behind the high school. They combed through fields near the road where the bus traveled. Deputies stopped cars at checkpoints, asking if anyone had seen a girl walking. Most said no. A few offered vague, unhelpful answers. At 3 p.m., a tip came in from a delivery driver who claimed he saw a teenage girl near the gas station off Highway 27 the morning before. Security footage showed a girl with a similar build, but the image was too blurry to confirm anything. When they reviewed the timestamp, the girl in the footage appeared 35 minutes after Lila had already been marked absent at school. It couldn't be her. Another dead end. Detectives shifted focus back to the family. They asked harder questions this time. Did anyone struggle with alcohol? Did anyone have a temper? Had Lila ever run away before? Each question stung. Diane answered calmly, though her voice trembled. Carl grew frustrated, not at the detectives, but at the implication that the house could have played a role. "We loved our daughter," he kept saying. But love, detectives knew, doesn't always shield children from danger. By early evening, another detail surfaced. The youth pastor, Evan Cole, reported that Lila behaved strangely at church the Sunday before she vanished. She covered her sketch when he approached. She kept her headphones on the entire time. She avoided eye contact. He described her behavior as off, though he couldn't explain exactly how. Detectives added his name to the list of people to interview more thoroughly. By nightfall, the case board in the sheriff's office held photos, timelines, and notes pinned in neat rows. But the center square, the box labeled last known location, remained blank. No evidence placed Lila anywhere except the short path she walked every school day. At 10 p.m., detectives sat in silence around the board. One of them finally said what they all felt: kids don't vanish like this. Not without someone planning it. It wasn't official yet, but everyone in that room understood. They weren't searching for a lost child anymore. They were searching for someone who knew exactly how to erase a trail. And for the first time, the town faced a possibility none of them had considered in those first frantic hours. Whoever took Lila might not have been a stranger at all. Within days of Lila's disappearance, Rome, Georgia became a place where every conversation carried a shadow. People didn't speak loudly anymore. They didn't ask direct questions. Instead, they lowered their voices in grocery aisles, leaned closer in parking lots, and scanned the spaces around them before sharing new theories. The town didn't feel the same. It felt like everyone was waiting for something to break. The sheriff continued holding community meetings at the church hall. The first few meetings were packed. Entire families filled the pews, hoping for clarity, craving reassurance. But as days passed with no updates, the numbers shrank. Empty seats outnumbered filled ones. Parents stopped bringing their children. The room felt heavier each time. When deputies shared that they still had no suspects and no physical evidence, the whispers began. Small-town rumor doesn't need truth. It only needs space. And the absence of answers created plenty. Some people insisted an outsider must have driven through town, spotted Lila, and taken her without stopping. Others claimed they'd noticed strange activity near the woods, though none of them could explain what that meant. A few wondered aloud whether the family had told investigators everything. They didn't accuse directly, but their tone carried doubt. And doubt spreads fast. The local newspaper printed short updates that repeated the same facts. Search continues. No new leads. Community volunteers still needed. But one headline stirred the town more than any other. It came 2 weeks after the disappearance. Sheriff, nothing ruled out. Those 3 words fueled even more speculation. If nothing was ruled out, then everything was possible. Suddenly, every person became a potential suspect in someone else's mind. Gossip circled around the youth pastor, Evan Cole. People remembered him mentioning that Lila seemed anxious the Sunday before she vanished. Some found his concern sincere. Others found it suspicious. A few parents pulled their kids from youth programs altogether. Cole cooperated with detectives. He volunteered to join search efforts every single day. But even that stirred debate. Some said it proved his innocence. Others said it looked like cover. Harper, Lila's closest friend, became a magnet for questions. People approached her at school, in hallways, even in the cafeteria. They asked if she knew about a boyfriend, a secret plan, a hidden fight. She kept telling them the same thing: she wouldn't run. She didn't trust many people. But students still talked. Teenagers repeat stories, and stories change shape fast. Harper stopped eating lunch outside. She stopped drawing in the art room. She went straight home after school because the stairs in the hallways felt too heavy to carry. At the Monroe house, Diane and Carl kept receiving casseroles and prayers, but the tone had shifted. Some people came with real empathy. Others came with forced smiles and questions masked as comfort. One woman from church asked Diane, was Lila struggling with anything at home? The question was wrapped in gentle concern, but carried a sharp edge. Diane felt it. Carl heard it. They answered politely. But inside, their walls fortified. Deputies interviewed dozens of locals during this time. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, store employees, anyone who had crossed paths with Lila. Each person offered a piece of something, an observation, a memory, a guess. None of it brought detectives closer to understanding what happened. Still, one detail kept coming up in interviews. People mentioned seeing unfamiliar cars in the area in the weeks before Lila vanished. A blue sedan. A white pickup. A dark SUV. But when pressed, no one could remember license plates, faces, or specific days. The more deputies dug into those reports, the more they realized people were mixing memory with fear. Fear does that. It rewrites timelines. It blends days together. It makes things feel connected even when they aren't. Rome had another problem: pride. Small towns don't like acknowledging danger. They don't like the idea that someone they know could hurt a child. So the town split into two camps: those who blamed strangers, and those who quietly watched their neighbors with new suspicion. Detectives noticed this shift. They felt the tension in every interview. They saw it in the eyes of people who answered without blinking, trying too hard to appear calm. They saw it in others who avoided eye contact completely. Rumor changed the way people behaved. It made everyone feel like they had something to hide. By the third week, the sheriff held a press conference outside the courthouse. Reporters traveled from nearby counties. The sheriff stood at the podium with a stack of notes, but didn't read from them. He spoke plainly: this is not the kind of case that resolves quickly. We need cooperation, not fear. We need facts, not stories. His words helped settle the crowd, but only for a moment. People wanted answers. They wanted a villain. They wanted something they could point to and say, this is how it happened. But there were no footprints. No witnesses. Nothing that explained the sudden break in Lila's path. As weeks stretched into a month, hope didn't disappear, it shifted. The questions changed from where is she to what did we miss? But the most troubling question was the one few dared to say out loud: if Lila didn't leave town on her own, and no outsider was seen that morning, then where did she go? And who had the familiarity and the confidence to take a child from a place where everyone knew everyone? For most people in Rome, Lila's story slowly faded into the background. New schools were built. New stores opened along Turner McCall Boulevard. Kids who once joined the search grew up, moved away, came back with families of their own. For the sheriff's office, the Monroe file moved from an active case shelf to a cold case cabinet. It was still there, but tucked behind newer tragedies. Every few years, a new detective pulled it out, read it, shook his head, and put it back. No body. No suspect. No clear direction. Just a missing girl who walked toward a bus stop and never arrived. 21 years passed like that. Quietly. What broke the silence didn't happen in Rome at all. It happened 40 miles away, outside Cartersville, in a row of metal storage units behind a chain-link fence. In February 2024, a maintenance worker at Northside Secure Storage noticed water seeping under a roll-up door after heavy rain. Company rules required him to check for damage. He cut the lock, lifted the door halfway, and pointed his flashlight inside. The unit looked like a forgotten office. Cardboard boxes stacked crooked. Old filing cabinets. A stained desk missing one leg, propped up on bricks. Dust covered everything like gray snow. He spotted the problem right away: a crack in the back wall leaking water onto a tower of boxes. Company policy said anything that smelled like old paper and mold went straight to the dumpster. But before he tossed them, he noticed the writing on one of the wet boxes: Callaway Investigations. He shrugged, dragged the box into the light, and popped it open. Inside were plastic folders, manila envelopes, and a faded business card: Richard "Rick" Callaway, licensed private investigator. Callaway's license had been suspended years earlier. He'd moved out of state, then disappeared from Georgia completely. No one at the storage office even knew whose unit it was until the manager dug through old records. The payments had stopped 8 months earlier. The account was past due. The unit was scheduled to be cleared. The worker kept flipping through files, partly out of curiosity, partly to see what could be thrown away. Divorce work. Insurance fraud. Missing assets. All the quiet corners of other people's lives. Near the bottom of the box, he found a thick envelope, sealed but swollen from water. On the front, for words in black ink, Monroe Case, 2003. He didn't know what that meant. But the word case next to a year gave him pause. He brought it to the office, where the manager called the county sheriff's office to be safe. A detective arrived later that day, expecting another dead lead. Instead, when he opened that envelope, his chest tightened. Inside were photos, maps, and handwritten notes labeled with dates from 2016. 13 years after the original investigation stalled, someone had hired a private investigator to look into the Monroe disappearance. And law enforcement had never been told. One photo sat on top of the stack, wrapped in plastic to protect it from water. The detective slid it out carefully. It was a grainy shot of a parking lot in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Fluorescent lights reflected off wet pavement. Plastic bags hung from the arm of a woman standing near a laundromat door. The detective stared at her face. Older. Thinner. Cheekbones sharper. Hair pulled back. But the eyes. The eyes matched the 14-year-old girl from every old-school picture. The label on the back of the photo read, Possible ID, Lila Monroe? 2016, Chattanooga, TN Laundromat. They sent the photo to the state lab for comparison with old yearbook images. The response came back with a high probability match. Bone structure aligned. Distance between the eyes matched. Jawline matched. If the image was real, and there was no sign it wasn't, then it meant one thing: 13 years after she was reported missing, Lila Monroe had been alive. The detective who opened that envelope requested a meeting with the sheriff that same afternoon. They spread Calloway's notes, the photos, and the box contents across a conference table. The note showed hotel receipts, bus station visits, laundromat stakeouts, a list of possible sightings of a woman using different first names, but the same initials. LM. There was no record of who hired Calloway. No invoice. No contract. Just a single line in his notebook: client requested anonymity. Cash only. That detail bothered everyone who saw it. Who cared enough to pay a private investigator 13 years after Lila disappeared, yet never turned anything over to law enforcement? That question alone was enough to reopen the case. But the photograph held more than just Lila's face. In the glass door of the laundromat, just over her shoulder, was a faint reflection. A parking lot. A pickup truck near the back of the frame. Washed out by glare, but still visible. On the rear bumper, a partial license plate. 3 numbers. 2 letters. Just enough to start something big. The detective stared at that reflection for a long time. Then he slid the photo into a new evidence sleeve, wrote the date on the label, and tagged it for higher review. This wasn't just a cold file in a small county anymore. Within days, the image, the notes, and the storage unit discovery reached federal hands. And once they saw that face, older, tired, but undeniably Lila, one question became louder than all the rest: if she was alive in 2016. Why didn't she come home? All right, I need to stop here for a second. Did you catch that? Someone hired a private investigator to track Lila down 13 years after she vanished, and never told the police. Never contacted her family. Never made a single move to bring her home. Who does that? I want to hear your theory. Drop it in the comments right now. Was it someone trying to protect her? Someone trying to find her before the cops did? Or someone making sure she stayed hidden? This is where the story splits wide open, and I need to know where your head is at. And if you're still watching, if you've made it this far, then you're officially invested. You're not just a viewer anymore. You're part of this. So here's what I need from you: smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. I'm pushing toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single one helps this channel grow. More subscribers means more stories like this one get told. More cold cases get attention. More forgotten names get remembered. If you believe Lila's story deserves to be heard, don't just watch. Act. Subscribe. Like. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because the next part changes everything. Let's keep going. The day the case file reached federal hands, the energy around the Monroe investigation shifted fast. What had been a dusty cold file from a small Georgia town now sat under bright lights in a federal briefing room in Atlanta. Agents studied the photo from the Chattanooga laundromat again and again. It wasn't just the face that caught their attention. It was the way she stood. Tense shoulders. Guarded posture. One foot angled slightly, as if ready to step away at any moment. People who've been missing that long move differently. They look at exits first. They avoid bright lights. They position themselves where no one can stand behind them. Lila's posture told a story before anyone said a word. The partial license plate seen in the reflection gave investigators their first real lead. The numbers matched 8 trucks registered across Tennessee and North Georgia. 7 were dead-end vehicles belonging to people with no connection to Lila or Rome. The 8th belonged to a man named Evan Cole, the youth pastor. The same man who told detectives in 2003 that Lila seemed uneasy the Sunday before she vanished. Cole had moved out of Rome 2 years after the disappearance, claiming he needed to start fresh. He worked at a church outside Knoxville for a while, then suddenly left. After that, his work history turned patchy. Short-term jobs. Gaps of months. Rental records stretching across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. Nothing stable. Nothing permanent. Federal agents pulled his old interview notes from the case file. His responses looked calm on paper. But something about the timing, his move, the photo, the truck, made investigators pay attention. They ran his name again. No warrants. No pending charges. Nothing pointing directly to guilt. But they also didn't find something they expected, a clear reason for him to be in Chattanooga the day Calloway took that photo. Agents moved carefully. They didn't want to spook him. They didn't want to show their hand too early. Instead, they set up surveillance on the last known address listed for Cole, a trailer outside Oak Ridge, Tennessee. When they arrived, the trailer was empty. Furniture gone. Mail piled in the mailbox. Neighbors said he left weeks ago without telling anyone where he was going. One man mentioned seeing a truck matching the same model and color as the one in the laundromat reflection, but the plate was covered with mud. No one had seen him since. His absence didn't make him guilty, but it made him relevant. And relevant was enough to push the case forward. Investigators returned to Calloway's notes. The private investigator had written down dates and locations, but one detail stood out, a line scribbled near the bottom of one page: "Girl goes by Elena. Same jacket every time. Stays near shelters." Avoids cops. It wasn't just a sighting. It was a pattern. Agents used this information to search shelter logs across Tennessee and northern Georgia from 2014 to 2017. They found 7 entries for a young woman using the name Lena, matching initials and an almost identical physical description: thin, cautious, quiet, always wearing a faded denim jacket. 4 logs had no birth date listed. 3 listed a birthday that wasn't real. People who fear being found often lie about small details first. Agents cross-checked each shelter's visitor records, camera footage, and intake notes. They reached out to staff members who worked during those years. Many remembered her. Not as Lena, but as the girl who kept her hands in her pockets. One woman recalled her standing in line with her hood pulled low, glancing behind her every few seconds. She looked tired, the woman said. Like someone who hadn't slept in days. The search widened. 3 states. Then 6. Then 11. The breakthrough came from a small shelter near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, far from where anyone expected to look. A volunteer checked old files and found an intake form written in shaky handwriting. Name: Lena Marks. Date of birth: blank. Home address: none. Emergency contact: none. But the photograph stapled to the top corner held everything investigators needed. The same woman from the Chattanooga laundromat, just older and thinner. Dark circles beneath her eyes. A bruise along her jawline that she'd tried to hide by angling her face away from the camera. The intake was time-stamped from 2022. 8 years after the Chattanooga sighting. She was still alive then. Still moving. Still hiding. Investigators reached out to shelter staff. One worker remembered Lena because she always carried a sketchbook. She never let it leave her hands, the woman said. She drew the same thing over and over: trees. Another worker added something that made the room go still: she wasn't alone the day she came in. A man waited outside in a truck while she filled out the form. She kept looking at him through the window. They asked what the man looked like. She didn't remember the face. But she remembered the truck. Dark. Older model. Small dent on the passenger side. The description matched Evan Cole's vehicle. That detail cracked everything open. Within hours, the shelter photo joined the Chattanooga photo in the active case file. A timeline was built. She was in Chattanooga in 2016. She was in Baton Rouge in 2022. She had stayed alive. She had moved in secret. She had been watched. She had been kept close. Now investigators knew 2 truths. Lila didn't wander. Lila didn't travel alone. The search for a missing girl was now a hunt for a man who had stayed one step ahead for almost half her lifetime. When agents arrived in Baton Rouge to follow the shelter lead, they expected another dead end. Instead, they found someone who had been waiting years to speak. Her name was Emma Ray, a former shelter volunteer who worked the intake desk the week Lena Marks signed in. She didn't recognize the name at first. But when she saw the photo, her hand went still. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I knew she wasn't safe." Emma invited the agents inside her small apartment. The place was clean but crowded with files, notebooks, and stacks of letters from women she'd helped over the years. She poured coffee, sat at her kitchen table, and held the photo with both hands. "That's her," she said softly. She didn't talk much. But she looked like she wanted to run the entire time. The agents asked the obvious question, was she with anyone? Emma pressed her thumb into the edge of the photo. Yes. A man waited for her outside. She kept checking the door like she was afraid he'd come in. They asked what he looked like. Emma shook her head. I couldn't see his face. But the truck, she kept watching the truck. The description matched earlier sightings. Same color. Same age. Same dent. Enough to reopen the case formally. But what Emma said next shifted the entire investigation. She came back the next day, Emma said. Alone that time. She paused, breathing in carefully as if choosing every word. She slipped a note under the desk when she handed me her form. I didn't open it until she left. Emma reached into a folder beneath her table and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed at the corners. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper. I kept it because I thought. I don't know. Something told me I might need it someday. The agent unfolded it slowly. On the paper, written in uneven handwriting, were 4 words, "Tell my mother I'm alive." The room went still. Emma covered her mouth as if reliving the moment she first read it. She looked scared. More than scared. Like she was choosing between 2 bad choices. The agents asked why she didn't report it. Her answer was the first twist. I did report it, Emma said. I called the number on the missing poster. The man who answered told me the case was closed. The agents froze. What number did you call? Emma reached into her drawer and pulled out a folded flyer she'd kept all those years. A missing poster for Lila Monroe. The corner showed a phone number written in thick black ink. The number wasn't from the sheriff's office. It wasn't from the state tip line. It wasn't anything official. Someone had distributed their own flyer and rerouted information straight to themselves. The number traced back to a prepaid phone purchased in Knoxville, Tennessee. Registered under a fake name investigators now recognized Evan Cole. He had been intercepting tips for years. The case didn't just break open. It split wide. The agents asked Emma what else she remembered. That's when the second twist surfaced. The day she left, Emma said, she dropped something near the door. She walked to her bedroom and returned with a clear plastic bag. Inside was a small piece of torn denim fabric with a floral patch sewn onto it. I picked it up after she walked out. I thought she'd come back for it. The agents recognized the patch instantly. It matched the one stitched onto the jacket Lila wore the day she vanished in 2003. The truth hit the room like a weight. Lila never escaped that man. She was taken young, raised under control, moved from state to state, and kept invisible. The timeline changed. The motive changed. The understanding of Lila's life changed. Everything investigators thought they knew was wrong. For the next several hours, Emma told them everything she had pieced together from those brief encounters. Her hand shook when she signed her name. She kept her sleeves down even though it was hot. She didn't smile. She didn't look at anyone around her. Emma's voice cracked. People who've been controlled for years, they have a certain look. She had that look. She paused. She wanted help. But she didn't know how to ask. The agents asked if she ever saw Lila again. Emma nodded. One last time. Months later. She sat on the curb across from the mission, staring at the ground. When I walked toward her, she stood up fast like she'd been caught. Emma swallowed hard. She whispered, "He'll find me." Then she ran. The agents leaned in. "Did you see him?" "Yes." The same truck rolled by minutes later. This was the moment everything aligned, the photos. The shelter logs. The notes from the private investigator. The false tip line. The truck. and the fear in Lila's eyes. Emma ended with a single sentence that stayed with the agents long after they left. She wasn't hiding from the world. She was hiding from the man who stole her life. That night, when agents returned to their office, they pinned the torn denim patch to the top of the case board. Beneath it, they wrote 3 words: she tried twice. Once in 2016. Once in 2022. Both times, Evan Cole found her first. Now the question was no longer what happened to Lila. It was, where is Evan Cole, and is he still with her? When the truth finally reached Rome, Georgia, it hit the town like a delayed earthquake. The kind that doesn't make noise at first, but cracks everything once it arrives. The sheriff called a press conference at noon. Reporters packed the courthouse steps. Microphones crowded the podium. People who hadn't spoken Lila's name out loud in years now whispered it to the person beside them. The announcement was simple and direct: we have confirmed sightings of Lila Monroe alive in 2016 and 2022. The suspect remains at large. The crowd went silent. Silence deeper than shock. Silence that said, we lived our lives while she kept surviving alone. Some cried. Some held their hands over their mouths. Some turned away with guilt written on their faces. The biggest reaction came from those who had helped search for her 21 years earlier. They remembered the nights walking through fields with flashlights. They remembered the prayers, the flyers, the dread. Learning she had lived through all those years, just out of reach, tore open wounds they thought had healed. For Diane Monroe, the truth came in waves so strong she needed to sit down before she could absorb them. Agents walked her through everything. The sightings. The shelter note. The denim patch. The truck. The photos. Every detail was an answer and a question at the same time. They showed her the note first: tell my mother I'm alive. Her hand shook. Her breath broke. She held the paper so tightly her knuckles turned white. That's her handwriting, she whispered, tears falling onto the page. My baby wrote that. Carl stood behind her, hands clenched at his sides. He stared at the photo, the one from the Chattanooga laundromat. A woman who looked like his daughter. Older, but unmistakable. He swallowed hard but didn't cry. Carl's pain lived deeper, in a place he didn't show easily. The agents explained what they believed: Lila didn't leave Rome willingly. She didn't run away. She was taken. She stayed alive under control. She tried to escape twice. Both times, Evan Cole found her before the world did. Carl sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I thought she was gone, he said quietly. I thought she was gone the same day she went missing. Diane placed her hand on his back. He didn't lean into her, but he didn't pull away either. 21 years of distance softened in a single breath. The sheriff apologized directly to the Monroes, something he didn't have to do, but something they needed to hear. We failed you, he said. We didn't see what was right in front of us. Back in Rome, the community struggled with the truth. Churches held vigils. Restaurants placed candles near their entrances. Teachers pulled out old ye-books and looked at Lila's photograph through new eyes. Students who barely remembered her whispered about the life she lived after leaving their halls. But the hardest truth came from federal agents themselves. They believed Lila didn't die peacefully. They believed she spent years trying to find a safe moment to get help. They believed she made her final attempt in Baton Rouge, alone, frightened, worn down after years of running. Her remains were found in a wooded clearing outside Oak Ridge, Tennessee, months after the shelter sighting. No marker. No grave. Just a quiet place where someone left her and walked away. When Diane and Carl visited the clearing, it was cold. The sky hung grey. The tree stood bare. Diane kneeled in the grass and placed her hand on the earth. She didn't speak at first. She just breathed slowly, as if trying not to break. Carl stood behind her, looking out over the trees. Silent for a long time. Then he said she shouldn't have died alone. Diane answered softly, she didn't. She held on. She fought. She tried. The agent stepped back to give them space. The world felt still, as if the trees themselves were listening. A simple wooden cross was placed at the site. No plaque. No inscription. Just a quiet marker for the girl who never stopped trying to come home. As they left, Diane turned to look one last time. "We'll bring her home," she said. Her voice was steady. Stronger than it had been in years. Back in Rome, people didn't talk about closure. They talked about responsibility. The responsibility to remember her name, her fight, and her attempts to reach the world that never reached back in time. The case file remained open. The search for Evan Cole continued. Tips poured in from across the region. Most were wrong. All were followed. And every night, the same question hovered over the sheriff's office: if she survived 21 years under control. How many others never spoke at all? And that's where this story sits today. Lila Monroe spent 21 years fighting to be found. She left notes. She dropped clues. She whispered for help in the only way she knew how. And twice, the system failed her. But here's what I need you to understand: her story isn't over. Because every time you share this video, you're putting her name back into the world. Every time you comment, you're telling the algorithm that this case matters. Every time you subscribe, you're helping me reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Evan Cole is still out there. And somewhere, right now, there's another person living the same nightmare Lila lived, waiting for someone to notice. So I'm asking you one more time: if you made it this far, if Lila's story moved you, then do something. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment. Share this video with someone who cares about justice. Take her side. Because silence? Silence is what let this happen for 21 years. And we're done being silent. Now, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from right now? And what part of this story hit you the hardest? I read every single comment. And I'll see you in the next one.